The day everything Stop-Ads Day began like any other for Sundar Pichai. The morning sun poured through the giant glass windows of his office, casting warm light across the sleek desk that was cluttered with reports, product prototypes, and the kind of urgent files that only a CEO of a tech giant could understand. He was in the middle of reviewing a high-level proposal when the intercom buzzed softly. "Sir, there's a little girl here to see you," the receptionist's voice was uncertain, almost hesitant. As if she wasn't sure she should even be making this call, Sundar looked up from his papers, confused. "A little girl," he repeated. "Did you say alone?" "Yes, sir." "She says she has an appointment," the receptionist replied, still sounding unsure. "But her name isn't on the schedule." "An appointment?" he frowned. The people who got into his office usually went through layers of security, assistance, and calendar approvals. He was curious now. "Send her in," he said finally. A moment later, the door opened, and there she was, no older than 10, with a neat braid down her back, wearing a faded pink dress and holding a thin, worn-out file. Her shoes were scuffed, and the straps looked like they might break any moment. But her posture was straight. Her chin lifted as if she was ready for something important. She walked right up to his desk without hesitation, placed the file in front of him, and said softly, "This is my resume?" Sundar blinked. "Your resume?" She nodded. "Yes. I want to work here." There was no arrogance in her tone, no joking smile, just steady, determined eyes that seemed far older than her small frame suggested. He slowly opened the file. Inside were a few pieces of paper. The first page had her name, age, and a short list of things she claimed she could do: typing, organizing, making tea, even helping people smile. Some of it was endearing. Some of it was heartbreaking, but what caught his attention was the last page. It wasn't typed. It was handwritten in neat, small letters. Just one sentence. And as he read it, he felt something shift inside him. The sentence read, "Please give me a job so I can buy my mom's time back." He looked up at her, stunned. What do you mean by that?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, her small hands clenched the edge of the desk, as if holding herself together. "My mom works all the time," she said finally. "She leaves before I wake up and comes home after I'm asleep. I want to make enough money so she doesn't have to work 2 jobs. I want her to have time to talk to me again." The words hit him harder than he expected. Sundar had met countless entrepreneurs, engineers, and investors, but he couldn't remember the last time someone walked into his office asking for something so pure and so impossible. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Aliya." She said. Her voice was steady, but he could see the slightest tremble in her lip. And suddenly, Sundar was aware of just how much courage it must have taken for her to walk into a strange building, past security, and step into his office like this. He wanted to know more. "How did you even get in here?" Aliya gave a small smile, the kind that wasn't really happy, but tried to be. "I told the security guard that I was here for an interview." He laughed, but then he looked at my resume. After that, he said maybe you'd want to see it. There was something in her tone, not defiance, not pride, but hope. And hope had a way of making people do things they normally wouldn't. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Aliya, you know this isn't how jobs usually work, right? There are age rules, qualifications." "I know," she interrupted softly, "but I didn't know what else to do. I tried writing letters to other companies. Nobody wrote back. I even tried asking the shop where my mom works, but they said I was too small. And your mom doesn't know you're here?" He guessed. She shook her head. "If she knew, she would have stopped me. She doesn't like asking people for help." He understood that. He had grown up in a modest home himself, watching his own parents work tirelessly to give him opportunities. But there was something about this little girl's determination that reminded him of himself. Still, there were so many unanswered questions. Why was her mother working 2 jobs? Where was her father? How did she learn to write such a powerful line that could pierce through even the busiest mind. Before he could ask, the phone on his desk rang, his assistant reminding him of an urgent board meeting starting in 5 minutes. He didn't want to send her away. Not yet. Aliya, can you wait here for me? Just for a little while. She hesitated, then nodded. Okay. He stood, grabbed his notebook, and headed toward the door. But as he left, he glanced back and saw her sitting there quietly, her small fingers tracing the edge of his desk, her eyes wandering to the view outside as if she was imagining something far beyond the glass walls. He didn't know it yet. But this was the moment that would change everything for both of them. When he returned less than an hour later, ready to ask her more, the chair was empty. Aliya was gone. And on the desk, right where her resume had been, there was only a small, folded piece of paper with one new sentence written on it. It read, "I'm sorry I couldn't wait. Someone was following me." Asterisk, the search begins for a long moment. Sundar just stood there, staring at the empty chair. The office, which only minutes ago had felt filled with an unusual warmth, now seemed too big, too cold. His eyes moved to the small folded piece of paper left behind. He picked it up slowly, almost afraid of what it might say. "I'm sorry I couldn't wait. Someone was following me." The words were rushed, almost uneven, as if written while glancing over her shoulder. Sundar read them again, each time feeling the unease grow deeper in his chest. What did she mean? Was it just a child's imagination? Or was there a real danger lurking behind her determined little face? His mind raced. If someone was following her, then where was she now? And more importantly, was she safe? He stepped out of his office and called to his assistant. "Did you see the little girl who was here earlier?" His assistant looked up from her desk, puzzled. "No, sir. I didn't see her leave. I thought she was still in your office." The security team would know. Sundar moved quickly to the main lobby, his footsteps echoing against the marble floor. The guard at the front desk recognized him immediately and straightened. "Sir?" "The girl who came in earlier, Aliya. Did you see her leave?" The guard frowned, as if replaying the scene. In his mind, yes, but she went out in a hurry. She kept looking behind her. I thought maybe she saw someone she knew, but then she crossed the street without even looking. That didn't sit right with him. Sundar's position when he often dealt with calculated risks in business, but this wasn't business. This was a child. He could have let it go. He could have told himself that whatever was happening was not his responsibility. But the truth was something about that one sentence on her resume, "Please give me a job so I can buy my mom's time back," had already anchored itself in his mind. It wasn't just a request. It was a cry from a child who had learned too early how heavy the world could be. He took out his phone and called a contact from his personal security detail. "I need someone to look into a little girl named Aliya," he said. "Around 10 years old. I'll send you the description." As he hung up, he walked back to his office. He noticed the chair still slightly pulled out, a faint mark where her small hands had gripped the desk earlier. It felt personal now. He sat down and opened her worn-out file again, scanning each page for clues. Most of the resume was clearly homemade, probably typed on an old computer somewhere with a few parts scribbled in by hand. But one page caught his eye, a crude drawing of a house, next to which was a stick figure labeled Mama and a smaller one labeled Me beneath. In a child's handwriting was a single line, "This is our home," before they said we had to leave. Who were they? Landlords? Creditors? He didn't have answers yet, but each page pulled him further in. This wasn't just about a little girl asking for a job. This was a story about survival, desperation, and love for her mother so deep it could make a child walk into the office of one of the most powerful men in the world. But why him? Of all the companies she could have chosen, why had she come to his? He was still deep in thought when his phone buzzed again. It was his security contact. "Might have found something," the voice on the other end said. A girl matching her description was seen near the bus station, talking to a man. Witnesses say she looked nervous. Then they got on the same bus. Sundar felt a chill. "Do you know who the man is?" "Not yet. But the bus is heading toward." The old industrial district. We're following. The industrial district was no place for a child. It was filled with abandoned warehouses, small repair shops, and the kind of forgotten corners where no one asked too many questions. Sundar stood, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the elevator. His assistant called after him. "Sir, you're next." "Meeting. Cancel it?" he said without turning back. This was no longer curiosity. It was something deeper, a pull he couldn't ignore. Maybe it was the way she had looked at him when she said those words about her mother. Maybe it was the fact that he saw a reflection of his younger self in her, someone who understood struggle, who knew what it meant to want more for the people you loved. As he drove toward the industrial district, the city seemed different. Every corner, every shadow felt like it could hold a piece of the puzzle. His thoughts kept circling back to her last words in the office. Someone was following me? But he couldn't shake the other question pressing at the edges of his mind. What if that someone wasn't a stranger? What if it was someone she already knew? And if that was true, then the danger wasn't behind her. It was right beside her. Asterisk into the shadows. The industrial district felt like another world. The clean, polished glass towers of downtown were far behind Sundar now. Here, the streets were narrower, the buildings older, their walls faded and cracked. Rust clung to metal gates, graffiti bloomed across crumbling brick, and the air carried a faint smell of oil and dampness. As his car slowed to a stop near a row of shuttered shops, Sundar spotted one of his security team waiting in the shadow of a lamppost. The man quickly approached, speaking in a low voice. The bus dropped them off 2 streets over. They walked together for a while, then turned down a side alley. "Together?" Sundar asked, his brows knitting. "So they know each other?" "Seems that way," the man replied. But she looked uncomfortable, kept glancing around like she wanted to run but couldn't. That unease from earlier deepened. Sundar motioned for the man to lead the way. They moved quickly, weaving through a patchwork of narrow lanes, each turn taking them further from the main road. The sounds of the city, car horns, chatter, music, faded until there was only the distant hum of machinery from a nearby factory. And then he saw her. Aliya stood near the corner of an old warehouse, clutching her worn-out file tightly to her chest. Beside her was a tall man in a faded jacket, his face partly hidden under a cap. Even from a distance, Sundar could see the tension in her small frame, the way her shoulders hunched as if bracing for something. The man was speaking to her, his voice low but sharp. She nodded quickly, but didn't look up. Sundar moved closer, his footsteps silent. As he approached, the words became clearer. "Told you not to talk to strangers. You think walking into that building was smart?" The man hissed, "You're going to ruin everything." Aliya's voice was barely a whisper. "I just wanted to..." "You wanted to what?" The man snapped, cutting her off. "You don't make the rules here." "I do." It wasn't just the tone. It was the way he stood too close, his hand occasionally brushing her shoulder in a way that made her flinch. Sundar's instincts sharpened. This wasn't simply someone looking out for her. There was a power in his stance, the kind that came from control, not care. The man reached for her file, and she pulled it back quickly. "No, this is mine." His hand froze in the air. For a moment there was silence. Then his lips curled into a thin, humorless smile. "You think this will help you? You think someone like him cares about you?" He didn't say Sundar's name, but it was clear who he meant. That was enough. Sundar stepped forward, his voice firm. "Aliya." Her head whipped around instantly. The moment she saw him, her eyes widened, not in fear, but in something. Close to relief, the man turned slowly, sizing him up. "And who are you?" he asked, though the faint recognition in his eyes suggested he already knew. "Someone who's wondering why a little girl told me she was being followed." Sundar replied, his gaze steady. The man smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Kids make up stories all the time." "Not this one," Sundar said quietly. "And not about this." Aliya's small fingers tightened around her file. She took a half step toward Sundar, as if pulled by some invisible force of safety, but the man shifted to block her. That was the moment Sundar made a choice. One that wasn't about corporate policy or media perception, it was about her. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them, and his tone dropped low enough that only the man could hear. Whatever you think you're doing here, it ends now. For a second, the man didn't move. Then he laughed. Short. Cold. You have no idea, do you? You don't know what she's gotten herself into. And with that, he stepped back, letting her go. Fine, take her. But don't come asking me for help when you find out the truth. Before Sundar could respond, the man turned and disappeared into the alley shadows, his footsteps fading fast. Aliya stood there, breathing quickly, her eyes darting toward where he had gone. Sundar crouched down so they were at eye level. Aliya, who was that? She shook her head, her lips pressing together. I can't tell you. If I do, something bad will happen. Something bad to who? He asked gently. She looked at him then, and in her gaze was a mix of fear, stubbornness, and something else. A deep, heavy secret no child should have to carry. To my mom? The weight of her words settled in the air between them. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about a girl trying to help her mother. It was bigger, darker, and it was clear now that someone didn't want her talking. He offered his hand. Come on. You're safe with me. For a moment she hesitated, then placed her small hand in his dot as they walked back toward the main road. She glanced up at him and asked in a trembling voice, If I tell you the truth, will you promise not to let them take her away from? At me? Sundar stopped in his tracks. Who's them, Aliya? She swallowed hard, looked around as if the shadows themselves could hear her, and whispered, The people who already took my dad. Asterisk, the truth she almost didn't tell. The street lamps flickered faintly as Sundar led Aliya toward his car. The industrial district seemed even quieter now. The kind of silence that makes you feel like someone is watching from just out of sight. Her small hand was still in his, but her grip had loosened, not from comfort, but from exhaustion, as if the courage that had brought her to his office earlier in the day was slowly being drained away. He opened the car door for her. And she slid in without a word, hugging her file tightly as though it were a shield. Sundar circled to the driver's side, his mind a storm of questions. Once the engine started, the gentle hum seemed to relax her a little. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Aliya, you said they already took your dad. What did you mean? She didn't answer at first. Her gaze was fixed on the passing streetlights, each one briefly lighting up her face before plunging it back into shadow. Finally, in a voice so soft he almost didn't hear it, she said, They said he did something bad? But he didn't. They just wanted him gone. Who wanted him gone? He pressed gently. She shook her head. I don't know all their names. My mom said not to ask too many questions. That it's safer if we pretend not to know anything. Words carried the kind of heaviness that didn't belong to a child. Sundar had seen injustice before, in business, in politics, in society, but hearing it from someone so young was different. It cut deeper. He tried another approach. Aliya, if you're worried about your mom, I can help, but I need to understand what's happening. Does it have something to do with the man we saw tonight? Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't answer, but her eyes flickered, and that flicker told him more than her silence. He decided not to push further, not yet. Trust was fragile, especially with someone who clearly had reason to guard her words. Instead, he asked where she lived. She hesitated before giving him an address in one of the city's older neighborhoods. The drive there took them away from the looming warehouses and back into streets lined with small, aging apartment buildings. Laundry hung from balconies, and dim lights glowed in a few windows. When they pulled up outside a narrow 3-story building with peeling paint, Aliya's posture changed. She sat up straighter, eyes scanning the street nervously. Please don't come inside, she whispered. If they see you with me, they'll know. He asked again, but she only shook her head, her braids swaying. She opened the door and stepped out quickly, clutching her file. Before she could shut the door, Sundar leaned toward her. Aliya, I'm not going to forget about this. If you need me for anything, you can call this number. He handed her a small card with his direct contact. She looked at it for a long moment before sliding it into her file without a word. Then she walked toward the building, her small figure disappearing into the shadows of the narrow entrance. Sundar waited in the car, watching the doorway. Minutes passed. Finally, a light came on in a second-floor window. A faint silhouette appeared. Two figures, one taller, one shorter. They seemed to be speaking in hurried tones. The taller one moved to the window, pulled the curtain closed, and the light went out. He drove away slowly, but his thoughts stayed behind with the little girl and her mysterious warning. The next morning, he couldn't shake it. His day was packed with meetings, but the image of Aliya's determined face kept pushing its way to the front of his mind. Halfway through a strategy session, he found himself staring at a graph without hearing a word anyone was saying. When the meeting ended, he called his security contact again. Can you run a quiet background check on an address? No alerts, no visits, nothing that might draw attention. I just need to know who lives there, any public records, anything unusual. The call ended, and he buried himself in work to keep from thinking too much. But by late afternoon, his phone buzzed. Sir. The voice on the other end began cautiously. There's something you should see. 20 minutes later, Sundar was in a discreet office his security team used for sensitive matters. His contact slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were a few pages of public records. But one page stood out, a police report from 2 years ago. His eyes scanned the lines, each word tightening the knot in his stomach. IYA, single quotes, his father had been arrested. On charges of corporate espionage, asterisk. But here's what made it strange. The company he was accused of stealing from wasn't just any company. It was a direct competitor of Google. And the name listed as the key witness against him was the same man Sundar had seen in the alley. With Aliya. He sat back, processing. If this was true, then Aliya's father had been caught in a web that reached into the very industry Sundar lived in. And if the man from last night had testified against him, why was he now hanging around Aliya? His contact spoke quietly. Sir, there's more. The charges were dropped before trial. No explanation in the public record. The man was released and then vanished. But 3 months later, he reappeared in the city, living just a few blocks from Aliya's home. Sundar closed the file slowly. Nothing about this felt like coincidence anymore. Dot and somewhere in the middle of all these questions. One thought hit him like a sudden blow. Maybe Aliya hadn't walked into his office by chance. Maybe she had been sent, but if that was true, was she there for help? Or was she there for something else entirely? Asterisk the secret in her mother's eyes that night. Sundar couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Aliya's face, the mix of hope and fear, the way she clutched that thin file, as if it could protect her from the world. He thought about the police report, about the man in the alley, and about the single sentence in her resume that had drawn him into all of this. Please give me a job so I can buy my mom's time back. Buy her mom's time back. From what? From work? From Get? Or from someone who was holding that time hostage? By morning, he decided he couldn't just sit behind his desk and wait for answers to come to him. He needed to see her again. Not in an office, not by chance, but in the place where she felt safe. If such a place even existed, he called his driver and asked to be taken to the address she had given him, but to stop 2 streets away. He didn't want to draw attention. Dressed in a plain jacket and cap, he walked the rest of the way, blending into the quiet morning crowd. The building looked the same as before, weathered paint, sagging balconies, and the faint smell of cooking oil from a small shop downstairs. He stood across the street, scanning the windows. No sign of her. Then he saw movement near the entrance. A woman stepped out, locking the door behind her. She had the same eyes as Aliya, deep, watchful. Carrying an invisible weight, her hair was tied back loosely, and her clothes were simple, The kind you wear when you're ready for a long day's work. Thought it had to be her mother. She didn't notice him as she started down the street, but Sundar followed at a careful distance. She moved quickly, stopping once at a corner to glance behind her, not out of paranoia, but with the reflex of someone who had learned to check her surroundings. Her path led to a small cafe tucked between two hardware stores. She disappeared inside. Sundar waited a minute, then entered. The cafe was dim and smelled of fresh bread. Only a few tables were occupied. She was behind the counter now, tying an apron around her waist, moving with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He approached slowly. When she looked up, there was a brief flash of recognition, not of him as a CEO, but of him as someone who had been in her life, however briefly, through her daughter's eyes. You're Pichai, right? She asked cautiously. He nodded. I met Aliya yesterday. She came to my office. The slightest flicker of alarm passed through her features, but she hid it quickly. I'm sorry if she caused trouble. She can be determined. She wasn't trouble, he said gently. But she told me she wanted to help you. She said she wanted to buy your time back. Her hands froze mid-movement. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she set down the tray she was holding and looked at him with a mixture of sadness and steel. That's not something a child should have to think about. And yet she is, Sundar replied softly. The silence between them was heavy. Finally she sighed. I work here in the mornings and at a warehouse at night. It's the only way to keep the rent paid and to keep certain people away from us. The man from yesterday, he said quietly. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You saw him? Yes. He seemed controlling. She said he had something to do with her father's disappearance. Her lips tightened. Aliya talks too much sometimes. It's dangerous for her to be around certain people. For all of us, if you're in danger, I can help, Sundar said, leaning in slightly. I have resources, protection. No one should have to live like this. She shook her head. You don't understand. It's not just about safety. It's about debt. Not money debt, favor debt. My husband owed someone a favor in the wrong world. And when he refused to pay it back the way they wanted, they made him disappear. Now they're making sure I don't forget that debt still exists. Sundar felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. And Aliya? She doesn't know everything. But she knows enough to want to save me. She thinks if she can make money, they'll let me go. The woman gave a bitter smile. They won't. People like that don't give time back. They only take more. Before he could respond, the cafe door opened. Sundar turned and froze Dot standing in the doorway, holding a paper bag. Was the same man from the alley. He stopped when he saw them, his eyes locking on Sundar. The room went still. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, the man walked over to their table. He placed the bag on the counter, but his attention never left Sundar. You're getting involved in things you don't understand, he said in a low, even voice. And if you keep going, you're going to find out why everyone else stays quiet. He turned to leave, but as he passed, he leaned close to Sundar's ear and whispered, Check the last page of her file again. You missed something. Then he was gone, leaving only the faint jingle of the cafe door behind him. Sundar's pulse quickened. What could he have missed? He'd read every page of Aliya's file. He pulled out his phone and called his office. I need you to bring me the file the little girl left yesterday. Now. When it arrived, he flipped through it again. The resume, the drawing, the handwritten sentence. And then at the very back, he noticed it. A second sheet taped to the inside of the back cover. So thin, it blended into the folder. He peeled it away carefully. Written in a hurried scrawl were 4 words. That made his chest tighten. They said, You're next. The day the truth stood in the open for a long moment, Sundar just sat there in the cafe, staring at those 4 words. They said, You're next. His hands tightened around the thin paper, the edges bending slightly under the pressure. He had been in tense negotiations, in billion-dollar decisions, in rooms where every word carried weight, but nothing had felt like this. This was personal. This was close. Aliya's mother saw the shift in his expression and leaned forward. What is it? She asked, her voice already laced with worry. He passed the note to her. The moment her eyes scanned it, her face drained of color. She didn't speak, but he could see the understanding and fear in her reaction. Who wrote this? Sundar asked quietly. She shook her head slowly. I don't know. But if it was in her file, then someone put it there knowing she would give it to you. Which meant Aliya's visit hadn't been entirely her own idea. Somewhere in her determination to help her mother, someone else had seen an opportunity. The question was to warn. Or to pull him in. Before he could think further, the cafe door opened again. This time, it was Aliya. Her braid was slightly undone, and her shoes were muddy. As if she had run here. The moment she saw him, she stopped in the doorway. Her eyes flicked to her mother, and then back to him. You weren't supposed to come here, she said in a small, trembling voice. Aliya, he began gently. Did someone tell you to bring that file to me? She hesitated, and in that hesitation, he saw the truth. Yes, she whispered finally. But I also wanted to, because I thought, maybe you can help us. Who told you? He asked. She bit her lip. Uncle Rafi. The name meant nothing to Sundar, but the reaction from her mother was instant. A sharp inhale, a glance toward the door, the way her hands gripped the edge of the counter. Aliya, go to the back, her mother said quickly. But now, she insisted. Aliya obeyed, disappearing behind the curtain that led to the kitchen. Sundar turned back to her mother. Is that the man from the alley? She nodded once, grimly. That's not his real name. He used to work with my husband. Before everything went wrong. If he's warning you, then it's because someone thinks you're standing in the way of whatever they're planning next. And then, as if the air itself was listening, the cafe's front window suddenly caught the reflection of a dark van. Pulling up outside. The engine didn't turn off. Her mother's voice dropped to a whisper. You need to leave now. But Sundar didn't move and leave you here. If you stay, you'll put all of us in more danger, she said urgently. Please, just go. I'll get Aliya somewhere safe. Before he could argue, the door opened again, and two men stepped inside. They weren't here for coffee. Their eyes scanned the room, locking on him instantly. One of them spoke. Mr. Pichai, we need you to come with us. And if I don't? Sundar asked, his voice steady. Asterisk, the man smiled without warmth. Then the little girl you seem so interested in might have a very bad day. It was a threat dressed in politeness, and it worked, not because Sundar was afraid for himself, but because he believed them about a Aliya. He stood slowly, every movement deliberate. Fine, let's talk outside. The moment they stepped out, the second man moved toward the van. But before the door could open, a black SUV screeched to a stop beside them. The doors flew open, and two members of Sundar's private security team emerged, moving fast in seconds. The men who had walked in so confidently were pinned against the side of the van, one of them shouting protests that no one was listening to. Aliya's mother appeared in the doorway, her arm around her daughter, both of them watching with wide eyes. When the street finally settled, Sundar walked back toward them. You're both coming with me, he said firmly. No more hiding in cafes and waiting for the next threat. Her mother hesitated, but Aliya stepped forward first. Will you really help us? He crouched so he was at her level. I will, but you have to promise me something too. No more secrets. Not from me, she nodded solemnly. Okay. The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers, private investigators, and late-night meetings. Piece by piece, the truth came out. Her father had been framed in a corporate sabotage scheme that reached higher than anyone had dared to think. The man from the alley had been caught between loyalty and survival, and in the end had decided. The only way to warn Sundar was through a Aliya. Got the case reopened quietly without public headlines. And in the meantime, Sundar made sure Aliya's mother had a safe job, far from the shadow of anyone who could hurt her. But what stayed with him most wasn't the corporate twists or the dangerous men. It was the memory of that first moment. in his office when a little girl walked in with a resume and a single sentence that had cut through all the noise in his world. Months later, he found himself back in his office on a quiet evening. There was a knock at the door. When it opened, Aliya stepped in, holding a new file. "Another resume?" he asked with a smile. She grinned shyly. "No, this one's for my mom. I thought maybe she could work here so we could see each other more." He took the file, his throat tightening just a little. "I think we can make that happen." And for the first time since that strange day, Aliya's eyes were free of fear.